Hey, Internet, good morning. How are you? Mark Arena here, Boston, Massachusetts. And you found my YouTube channel, Mark in his 50s, where hopefully I start adding a whole bunch of videos that are going to be interesting to you and maybe your friends and maybe their friends, and I'll grow a following. Whatever you do, if you watch this, do me a solid. Would you just like it or share it or make a comment? Make a negative comment. It's okay. There's nothing you can say that can conceivably hurt me. So that's really it. I want to dig into this, and I do a lot of health education with other veterans who happen to be homeless. I don't have any technology where I do this work, so I use a whiteboard and some dry ease markers. So my wife bought me a whiteboard and a brand new box of dry ease markers, and now I can make some whiteboards and share them with you. And the first one I came up with was, because I see other influencers doing stories on high blood pressure and heart disease and using GLP-1 drugs and all these other things for bodybuilders. And I think really what we need to do is we need to get down to the basics and explain really what some of those risks are if you're using anabolic steroids, and if I guess if you're not using them safely, or somebody's not helping you with it, and because the outcomes could be pretty bad. So I'd like to kind of just jump in with some basic information, and I'd like to start here. So as you can see, it's managing cardiovascular risks while using anabolic and androgenic agents. An introduction. We're just going to call them steroids. When we talk about anabolic and androgenic steroids, we're talking about testosterone and all of the derivatives. And I threw some probably more familiar drugs up here that are being used, and some typical weekly dosing ranges. They might not be the weekly dosing ranges for pro athletes, but this is sort of what the starting doses and what recreational athletes are probably using. So we have testosterone SIP, Masteron, Primobolan, Durabolan, Anavars are oral, and Trenbolone. What is an androgen, right? An androgen is a endogenous, something that comes from us, or a synthetic hormone that binds to an androgen receptor, and it influences male primary and secondary sex characteristics. If the best way to explain that, if you're a man and you remember going through puberty, those are the primary and secondary sex characteristics we're pretty much looking at. When we talk about anabolic, which is fucking great, right? Anabolic. We're talking about the capability of enhancing somatic tissue growth, or muscle tissue hypertrophy, which is really what we're looking to do. Okay. Do these have a use outside of being big and awesome? Yeah, absolutely. So you're probably familiar with TRT or HRT, like testosterone or hormone replacement therapy, and men or women using testosterone to bring low testosterone levels back to a normally high testosterone level for that person. Okay, so in men, it's hypogonadism. Could be primary, like they were born with it, or they have a genetic mutation, or it could be secondary, where the person has gotten older, or they have some other health problems that has contributed to a lower testosterone level. So this can help replace it. But we're not talking about that. In clinical areas, these drugs are used in burn units and critical care units and trauma units to help people recover from burns or severe injuries, to stave off protein malnutrition and retain lean muscle tissue while they get better. Historically, and for our purposes here, right, we're talking about these drugs, and we're talking about the risks. So these are things used by pro bodybuilders and other athletes that are becoming more popular among recreational athletes. And And these are the drugs that allow the user to maintain supraphysiological androgen levels, which is needed for massive muscle growth. But this is where it comes with clinical risks. And when we exceed typical doses and we're chasing extreme muscle hypertrophy, we place ourselves at risk of developing not just cardiovascular effects, but lots of physical effects. I'll mention cycles later on in this, but I'm going to just, if you don't know what a cycle is, it's taking off periods of using certain drugs to help give your body a break and let things go back to a more natural level. We're going to talk a little bit about the heart, because that's really what we're talking about today. If you're unfamiliar with what the heart looks like, this is kind of what it looks like. This is my rendition of a heart anyway. And it's not over here, it's in the middle of your chest. And we have this as the apex. So if you imagine yourself, you're kind of like this, right? And this would be your apex. These would be your atrias. This would be your left ventricle. This would be your right ventricle. This would be your left atria. This would be your right atria. Your aorta sits here. Your vena cava sits here. And blood comes back from the body through the inferior and superior vena cavas. It goes into the right atria, passes in through the valves to the right ventricle, and it goes out into the pulmonary veins, gets oxygenated, the blood, and the blood returns through the left pulmonary artery or the right pulmonary artery. It comes in to the left atria, moves to the left ventricle, and gets pushed during systole and out the aorta and blood flow. Some landmarks here are the superior and inferior vena cavas, the apex of the heart, the left coronary artery, so we'll be talking a little bit about coronary artery disease, the right coronary artery, circumflex artery, and I mentioned the great vessels. So this is the muscle that we don't want to damage, because often damage to this muscle is not repairable. So, why is cardiovascular disease risk important? Well, we're talking about risk, right? So we want to mitigate the risks to reduce damage. So if we don't know what the risks are, you have no idea how to mitigate them. And, so I think a good place to start is lipoproteins, so fats. Steroid use is associated with plasma lipoprotein changes. And a lipoprotein is the molecule that carries fat and triglycerides to your liver, okay? And triglycerides, waxy fat, mostly from dietary fat. Remember, HDL, you probably heard, is good cholesterol, right? That carries fats to the liver to get processed and leave the body. Higher HDL levels are usually associated with a lesser degree of cardiovascular risk. LDLs, the bad cholesterol, this is cholesterol that carries it through your vessels where it accumulates as plaques in your vessels, and this is what leads to atherosclerosis. That's kind of thickening and narrowing and gunking up of your blood vessels. And then there's something wicked bad, and that's the VLDL, and that's bad cholesterol. So it's very, very low density lipoproteins, and these are carrying triglycerides and all those dietary fats that are used for storage, right? That's kind of the nicer way of us saying you're just getting fat. So it's being used for stored energy. Steroid use is also associated with unfavorable blood pressure as well. So if you're unclear about what blood pressure is when your heart beats and blood is ejected through the left ventricle, through your aorta, out through your body, your blood pressure is the measurement of the force or the pressure against the walls of your arteries. If the walls of the arteries are pliable and flexible and clean, then the likelihood that your pressure is going to be normotensive, normal, or on the lower good side, versus blood vessels that are thick and inflamed from sugar and fat and leftover platelets and vessel spasms and all this nonsense, then your pressure is going to be elevated. So good, green, right? Good is green. 120/80, roughly, and less is a good blood pressure. 130/80 and above is considered a bad blood pressure or a high blood pressure. Actually, you know what? Let's call it good and bad. I like that better. Really bad blood pressures, consistent levels, consistency. 3 or 4 days out of the week of 140/90, you probably have high blood pressure. So these variables have been studied. I don't think they've really been studied in massive depth or to any great extent. But in one of the studies that I came across, and I think this was conducted by, I think, Mager, and this was in this study. I don't know if I footnoted it. I think it was the American College of Cardiology journal. But it's the Hallam study, not like the Globetrotters or a hip happening place in New York, but health risks of anabolic and androgenic steroids used by amateur male athletes, Hallam. So these amateur athletes received a one-time cycle of anabolic steroids. I apologize, I don't even remember which drug they got. For our purposes here, let's call it testosterone. And after that cycle, they had an increase in strength, they developed acne, and they developed gynecomastia. So they developed gynecomastia, which I think is interesting, after their one cycle. So I have to wonder, like, what was their existing estrogen levels and testosterone levels before they received the drug during the study. But what it showed was they showed an average of 6.87 millimeters of mercury increase in their systolic blood pressure. And remember, that's the blood pressure that is when the blood is ejected from the heart. That's the pressure against the arteries. And they also showed an increase in diastolic blood pressure, and that was 3.17 millimeters of mercury. And diastole is that sort of that period of refilling, or the period in between your heartbeats. And they also saw that their LDLs, their bad cholesterol, went up. Their HDLs, their good cholesterol, went down. And their very low density lipoproteins, their bad cholesterol, also went up. So just in this one study, this cohort developed all these cardiovascular risks that we would want to mitigate, right? The nice thing is when they completed the cycle and the study was over, pretty much everybody just returned back to baseline. So there was no significant damage done. But these are the mechanisms that can occur that place us at risk for atherosclerosis, coronary artery disease, and cardiomyopathy. I don't officially do plugs for White Monster, but this is the shit. Coronary artery disease. We pointed out left and right coronary arteries here on our hat. Coronary artery disease is when the blood vessel gets gunked up with crap. And in big vessels, it's going to lead to an increase in blood pressure. In little vessels, in the heart, coronary vessels, it's going to lead to impaired blood flow to the heart, which is going to lead to a lack of oxygenated blood, which leads to ischemia, that's the chest pain. And that can lead to heart attack and sudden cardiac death. Over time, as the heart tries to work harder and harder and harder around these narrowed and gugged up vessels, other conditions can occur. Things like heart failure and cardiomyopathy. So roughly around 3% of steroid users will develop an acute myocardial infarction. They'll have a heart attack before the age of 50. Some steroid users are going to be more likely to develop coronary plaquing and have higher rates of heart attacks compared to non-steroid users. There's very likely a dose-dependent relationship, so how much and how often and for how long steroid gets used. So we look at lifetime duration in use, is probably correlated to the severity of atherosclerosis. Remember, that's plaquing, fats, clots, and vasospasms in the blood vessels. Cardiomyopathy. With cardiomyopathy, we see enlargement and damaging of the heart. Sometimes this is caused by coronary artery disease, sometimes it's caused by high blood pressure, sometimes there's some genetic effects. But really what we're talking about here is like extended high blood pressure in people who are using anabolic steroids. So we know when we lift, right? And in the presence of something that's androgenic and anabolic, we're gonna grow muscle cells. We're gonna get them bigger, and muscles are gonna get stronger. These are myocytes. In the heart, has a similar effect to cardiomyocytes. So the heart muscle cells, which I didn't draw in here, but you can imagine, you look at these striations that are here in the heart muscle, that if we zeroed in on those would be your cardiomyocytes. So this is the part of the heart, the left ventricle, which seems to develop most of the thickness, and you may see that abbreviated in some places as LVH, left ventricular hypertrophy. So it's not a good thing. Like normally we think of a muscle with hypertrophy, that's a good thing. It becomes bigger and stronger. In this case, it becomes bigger and weaker. So there's an increase in things like fibrotic tissue changes and collagen and things like that. And if maybe the next time we'll do a cutaway so we could show you. So the wall will thicken. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do that. So let's say the wall thickens, right? But look. Okay. So instead of this, it's now this. Does that make sense? Because I think that's a fucking great visual. So the wall is thickened, it's become weaker, and the chamber size has become smaller. So what can we imagine right there and then? Well, I would imagine an increase in pressure. We have a reduced area for volume. And as this increases, the heart is going to try to work against this. And eventually what's going to happen is this is going to thicken, this is going to thin, this is going to open, and we had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Now we have dilated cardiomyopathy. This just came to me, and I just thought this is fucking great. So as you can see, look at now this muscle wall is weak, right? It's weak because it's thin. This muscle wall is weak because it's thick and stiff. And imagine how a cardiac cycle is now working, right? So remember what we said. The blood comes back from the body, and it goes into the right atria. And it goes from this chamber into this chamber. And we have the risk of pooling the blood. We have an ineffective push. So as the blood gets pushed to go through the pulmonary veins, there could be some blood left along in here. Blood left along in here is likely to get thickened and develop clots. Blood gets oxygenated, comes back into the left atria and comes into this small space, and then they tries to push it out through the aorta, and it's going to push ineffectively. So now we have a physical state of high blood pressure and a weakened heart. Does that make sense? So, you know, I hope that makes sense. This is where we're going to get systolic and diastolic dysfunction. So, in this case, these guys pretty much turned out okay and didn't develop cardiomyopathy, because the question would be, once there's cardiac remodeling or heart remodeling, is this myopathy recoverable? No, I don't know. I don't think there's enough information out there to say that it is. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So what do we do? Here's the page of what we do. I hope you like this picture. This is a picture of Stark Industries Super Soldier Serum. I tried to throw some details in here. So it has Dr. Erskine's name on it. It has the date from March 1941, E616. The geeks out there will know what I'm talking about. And it's under Project New Birth. So anyway, steroids used in the Marvel universe. We want to avoid sudden cardiac death, right? You probably know by now, cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer of all men in the United States. It's the #1 killer of all women in the United States. It's the #1 killer of all men and women globally. It's not measles, it's not COVID-19, it's up there, but it's not COVID-19. It's not motor vehicle crashes, it's not breast cancer, and it's not school shootings. It's heart disease and leading to sudden cardiac death. So roughly about 47% of all men have high blood pressure. A percentage of them don't know it. About 40% of us are overweight and obese. You know what? They don't know it either. Those are the same guys who are like, yeah, if I just dieted down, bro, for like 2 or 3 weeks, I'd be ripped. Right now I'm about 12% body fat. So they don't know. And we talked extensively about cholesterol and lipids, and about, say, 10% of all of us have elevated cholesterol. And I think that number is relatively small, because I don't think as many people actually get their blood work tested. Heart disease is the leading cause of death. Out of all the cases of sudden cardiac death, roughly about 10% of those cases survive. It's not like on TV or in the movies when somebody survives cardiac arrest. It's not like they just jump back up and rejoin society. Every once in a while, we see in the bodybuilding world a young, often successful bodybuilder is found dead in his hotel room or dead in his condominium, and he died of a heart attack. And it's really sad, because the probability that his use of steroids was unmonitored and it contributed to his death. Steroids are often attributed to sudden death in athletes. I say that with a grain of salt, because we have really a limited amount of quality information on the actual causality. But there is a suspected 3-fold higher mortality rate among steroid users compared to non-steroid users. But again, I take that with a punch of salt, because again, that's not really fully explained, and we don't have a lot of really good studies on it. So there's that. But I wanted to talk about risks before we, the managing risks before we wrap it up, because that's really the whole purpose of this. I'm not a physician, like I told you, so none of this information is meant to be taken as diagnostic information or used to diagnose a condition or treat a condition or as medical advice, because the hell do I know? So, but I do know about a little bit about this and how we can manage risks. And if you're a coach or you're a trainer or you're the gym bro, or even if you're a healthcare provider who's not a physician, I got to tell you, there's no substitute for physician referral. Pretty popular on the internet right now, like on Instagram and whatnot. There's a lot of talk about biohackers and people who aren't physicians, and these physicians don't know anything, and only one or two physicians know something, and they're always arguing with each other about who knows what and who knows the most. And they also mention things like mainstream cardiology and mainstream endocrinology probably don't know a lot about this. You know what? They actually do. They're just not sharing it because they're not likely to discuss openly the use of anabolic steroids because they're illegal, right? So that's the real reason. It's not that they don't have any working knowledge. There's probably not a lot of them out there, but that's, come on. Think that one through a little bit. So what should we do? Well, we should educate about the risks of steroids, and they have harmful supraphysiologic effects when our androgen levels are dramatically impacted. That doesn't mean we're telling people not to use them, right? We're telling them to use them cautiously. We want to minimize serious cardiovascular risks and non-cardiovascular disease. So non-cardiovascular disease would be all those other things we think about, like when we think about oral steroids and liver damage, but also damage to the brain, kidney, and the pancreas. And I could talk about this all afternoon, but maybe we'll do some other things targeting those organs just for general purposes, not just related to steroids, because you could draw the parallels. When we talk to people, we got to face it. We got to be safe and non-judgmental in our approach when we discuss this, because it's an illegal drug use, right? So there's that. The second thing is if we come at somebody, either too assertively for them or aggressively, then they're gonna retreat. They're not gonna be honest and helpful and forthcoming with information. And the trouble with that is they may, if you're the physician, particularly, they may minimize their use or minimize any side effects. We don't want people to arrive at the point when serious adverse effects become irreversible. Really, that's our end goal. Okay. We want to talk about lifetime exposure. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this is that whole duration of dose. So we're looking at the type of steroid, the dose, the frequency, the route, perhaps even the source. I know this comes up in question about things that are compounded in the United States versus things that are compounded in China, things that are compounded in Mexico, that they're all relatively the same. I hear different things, and I don't know for certain, so I really can't comment on that. And we should know about stacking steroids, meaning taking likely testosterone as a base, and then masteron or primobolan or durabolan or whatever afterwards, and other PEDs, whether these are stimulants, thyroid hormones, growth hormone. I would even cause to say throwing in things like GLP-1 drugs and metformin and insulin and things like that, because all those drugs have impacts on our cardiovascular health and fitness. And not all of them bad, but they do have some impact. So this is what an algorithm for assessing risks would be like, aside from history taking and observation and things like that. Again, we want to begin with relevant history, so we're looking at type, dose, and frequency. Lab work. Sort of the offshoot of the algorithm here is that testing for drugs is pretty expensive and may not be covered by somebody's insurance. So they may have to pay out of pocket and do like concierge medicine or one of these online programs where you can order your own labs. I want to say through through Quest or Quest Diagnostics or LabCorp, and you can just go have your labs drawn, and they'll send you the results. You got to pay out of pocket for that. But you want to know what your total and free testosterone level is, your follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. Men have these too. Hemoglobin and hematocrit. We can do a whole class on states of red blood cells. Liver functions and lipid testing. You want to know all of that. There are some other tests like imaging studies and other measurements. Blood pressure would be the key. Right now you can buy a very inexpensive, very effective home blood pressure monitoring kit, probably on Amazon or down at the Walmart, and you can check your own blood pressure on a daily basis. Electrocardiograms, people get sometimes routine EKGs, usually after they're 40, to look at cardiac rate and rhythm and the electrical activity in the heart. TTEs, transthoracic echocardiograms, this is an ultrasound picture of the heart, put a transducer like you might see on an ultrasound on the chest wall, and they look at pictures of the heart and the more immediate surrounding structures. And this gives the physician an idea of the function of your heart, how your valves are working, the thickness of your heart, and assessing things like our LVH. I don't know so much that somebody's going to order that unless they have a significant complaint. I hear a little bit about like calcium ion scans or calcium CAT scans. It's a CAT scan. Again, insurance, I don't know if they're going to pay for something like that. Paying out of pocket is pretty costly. And frankly, it's one of those things that I think if that's what you're exploring, it's too little too late. And if we're already picking up calcium plaquing in the coronary vessels, the damage has already been done. So what do we want to do? If testosterone is elevated, we could throw in inhibitor drugs if that's the case. It's not the case for everybody. We want to perhaps reduce the testosterone dose by 10 to 20% every month until we get down to no dosing. And slower might be necessary because, we all have this, we develop a persona, of ourselves when we put on muscle size and we get really lean. And that might change for somebody when they're coming off steroids. So this could be kind of a little bit of a mental game. So the duration of the downward titration might take a little bit longer. If there's other drugs in the stack, this is the time to maintain the testosterone and drop those other drugs. At some point, we're going to repeat the labs, all the labs that we mentioned beforehand, and if we want to sort of get rid of some of these things and just kind of go down and dirty and order our own labs, you can check HDLCs, LH, luteinizing hormone, FSH, sex hormone binding globulin, and just to see if they're low. If they're low, testosterone is still out of whack. You'll be looking at AST and ALT, your liver enzymes, are they high? Well, if they're high, things are probably still out of whack. And I know that somebody watching this or somebody will tell somebody and they'll say, oh, my AST and ALT are high. If they're not, I'm not lifting hard enough. Stop it. That's not true for everybody. So, and it's one of those bogus informations out there. What else can we do? So we've got our guy on a lower dose of testosterone or no testosterone now, and we're waiting for his body to reboot. And if he's having trouble with that, this might be a suggestion for somebody to suggest HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. It's my understanding the dosing range of this is 1 to 2 grams IU subcutaneously 2 to 3 times a week. And so we're using this to try to stimulate Leydig cells in the testicles to develop testosterone, to try to get things back to a higher And then what are the other considerations and what's next? Well, I don't really know. I think if the point is to pursue competitive bodybuilding using anabolic or androgenic agents, then it's, after some off time, it might be a time to restop them. But now that we know all this information, we know what the risks are, we can institute some of those risk management techniques and monitoring ideas to help put off risks and hopefully things like sudden cardiac death. That's really all I got, and I want to stop because I don't want these to be all that long because then nobody will watch them. So I'm Mark Arena. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. This is my whiteboard. This is my YouTube video. For the love of God, just follow me and tap like and make some comments in there. And I could probably start doing live videos once I get to 50 followers. I think I have like 4 right now. So somebody do me a solid. All right. Thank you. Have a nice week. Enjoy the rest of Passover. Stay safe and have a happy Easter.